The Bible is not one book. It is 66 books, written over about a 1500 year period, by 40 or more authors on 3 different continents: Asia, Africa, and Europe. The places in the Bible are geographically accurate and can be visited today. Many people in the Bible are verified historical figures. The Old Testament is before Jesus became man. It consists of creation, world and Jewish history, prophecy, wisdom literature, and more. It contains also a list and events of the kings of Israel, wars that happened, rulers, things like that. It consists of moral laws, of course. The New Testament, which starts with the Gospels, is Jesus coming to earth. It's 4 different accounts of Jesus' life, death, and resurrection. 2 are from eyewitnesses: Matthew, aka Levi the tax collector, and John, the apostle, the beloved disciple of Jesus, the son of Zebedee. 1 was written by Mark, who got his information from Peter, who was an eyewitness, an apostle of Jesus. Another was written by Luke, who is a companion of eyewitnesses, and it seems he interviewed many eyewitnesses to compile his gospel. He also wrote the book of Acts, which he was present for. In the Gospels, Jesus fulfilled many of the Old Testament prophecies. The New Testament tells of history from the early church, letters to the churches, of course, the life and the cross and the resurrection of Jesus in the Gospels. But it contains history of the early church, letters to the early church, and letters to people that can help in many ways, of which is helping Christians with their walk with Christ today. It also contains Revelation, which is an end times prophecy that was revealed to John. Different translations of the Bible. The Bible was originally written in mostly Hebrew and Greek and a little bit of Aramaic. There's only 2 books that have Aramaic in it, Daniel and Ezra. So it had to be translated to English. Most of the time, any reliable Bible version or translation is not a completely different Bible like people think. It is the same Bible translated differently. So, there are over 400,000 Bible variants. And people hear that number and they bug out, you know what I mean? But let me give you some examples. One variant might say, or one translation or variant might say, Jesus said to his disciples. Another might say, Christ said to his disciples. And yet another, Jesus Christ said to his followers. You see how there could be so many variants? And imagine how much variants a whole book has. That's why there's so many variants of the Bible. And sometimes it's translated differently. Sometimes it's word for word translations. Sometimes it's thought for thought translations, so we can understand it in English better. Sometimes it's a paraphrase, so people with who don't have that good of a reading level can understand it better. But that's what is meant by variants and versions. The scripture we have today is very reliable historically, even from a non-Christian perspective. The Old Testament is rarely disputed about. The Old Testament manuscripts are rarely disputed about. But the Greek New Testament we have over 5,800 manuscripts, some of which date back to the late 1st century, which is Jesus lived in the 1st century, so right around not too far after the cross and the resurrection. By the way, that sounds like a lot. If you don't understand, the more manuscripts, the better. Manuscripts are like copies. So they had the gospel. They wanted to send it to another church. They had to make a copy. Why is it better if we have more manuscripts? Because imagine we had 10 manuscripts, right? And 3 of those manuscripts were different. They said something contrary. It would be hard to to say which were true and which were false. But since we have 5,800 manuscripts, and this is just an example, imagine we have 5,800 manuscripts and 100 are different, but 5,700 match up. We're going to know that the 5,700 manuscripts are the correct manuscripts and the 100 are not the correct manuscripts. So the Gospels were confirmed. Some people have a claim like say, oh, those weren't the authors of the Gospels, because a lot of them don't put their name as the writer, like they don't sign it, but that was pretty normal in that period of time, the first century. But the Gospels were confirmed by many official early church members who were linked to the apostles by chain, usually someone knowing someone who knows the apostles, or someone actually knowing the apostles themselves. Here are some examples of a few. Only one person separates John the Apostle in the Gospel writer to Irenaeus, Polycarp. There's Tertullian, Carthage. There's Tertullian of Carthage, Clement of Alexandria, and Justin Martyr. And these are people who have links to the apostles and claim that it was written by these people. And also there are no rival claims of authorship. So there's no one who's like, oh, I think he wrote it, not John. I think there's no official person who could name a different person who might have wrote the Gospels. It is just the consensus from the early church is that the Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are the ones who wrote the Gospels. John and Matthew are first-hand eyewitnesses of Jesus. They're his apostles. But Mark and Luke are minor characters who are not eyewitnesses. But they got their sources from eyewitnesses. Mark got his information from Peter, who was an eyewitness. Luke was a companion of eyewitnesses, and he was present in the book of Acts right after the resurrection, and it seems that he interviewed many eyewitnesses to compile his gospel account. And it doesn't make sense that people would say Mark and Luke were the authors if they weren't the authors. For example, there are fake heretical gospels that we know are 100 to 200 years after the apostles had already passed away, like the gospel of Barnabas, the gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. We can tell those are later Gospels that are not written by those people. They're fake Gospels. But you can see they added important names as the scholarship, as the writers. Mark and Luke are not people that you would put as the author unless they were the author, because they're not important. The authors didn't want fame, they didn't want praise. People in the first century knew who wrote these documents without each other having to sign their name. The evidence for the Bible, and specifically the life and cross of Jesus Christ, is better and more abundant than most secular events from antiquity. We have no first or second-hand records of Alexander the Great, but I've never heard anyone dispute Alexander the Great's existence. But the evidence we have for Jesus is out of this world. People are extremely biased when it comes to the Bible. And I get it because of the miraculous nature, but God proves himself every single time. Seek him, seek the truth, and you will find the truth. It's not about what I believe, it's not about what you believe, it's not about what feels good. It is about what is true. And many people will give their lives for a worldview that they believe to be true. A belief system, a philosophy that they claim to be true. People will give their lives for a false religion that they think is true. But the apostles gave their lives for something, specifically the resurrection, that they claim to have seen, they claim to have heard, they claim to have touched, they claim to have experienced. They talked to other people who experienced the same thing and confirmed that they were not bugging. And one day maybe I'll do a video about some objections to the resurrections, because atheist scholars know the things I'm telling you. So they have to get around those miraculous things. My people perish for lack of knowledge. Study. Study, study, study. If your worldview is true, it'll prove itself. Straight like that.